Good morning. My name is Father Kopec, talking to you from the same place. Grab some coffee to join me. We have a lot to talk about today. I have the great pleasure of telling you that, unfortunately, I won't be talking to you about anything very spiritual today. I know that's been sort of the thing, and sort of the thing that priests usually talk about. But unfortunately, it's time to get a little practical, and so that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about some practical matters. It's going to be somewhat removed from Holy Week as a whole, but not removed from the situation at hand, meaning quarantine. That being said, there will be a little blip at the end about Holy Week in particular, so stay tuned for your dose of spirituality this morning. As far as practical things go, this is going to be something that's geared more towards parents or older children. There's going to be some mature content, nothing too serious, of course, but at the same time, if you're all with all of the youngins and kiddos all on the couch watching this for spiritual enlightenment this morning, I would probably suggest to take advantage of a quick pose I will give you, so you can pause my face, not doing anything strange, and maybe send the kids down to play with some Legos or out to climb a tree. Pause. Okay. So what I actually have to talk to you about is the secret of parenting. I discovered it. And I know everyone's wondering this, and I should probably market it and sell it, make a lot of money. But I won't. I'll just tell you, the secret of parenting is actually just love in everything. It's actually just loving your children in absolutely everything. But love means looking for what's best for them, looking for their salvation, and nothing for yourself. That's not the point. It's not why you became parents. But also for older children, it's the same thing. There has to be a reciprocal love. Loving actually in everything, for them, not for you. And so what we're going to talk about today is out of love for your children. It's out of love for every soul that perhaps can watch this, every soul that would be open and willing to receive something. But it's especially out of love for your children that we're going to talk about the following information today. Some of it might be a little bit difficult, but it's worth it. So for starters, we need to talk about tools. I have a tool here. It's a hammer. Hammers, everyone is pretty familiar with how a hammer works. You pound nails in and you build houses and all that sort of thing with a hammer, one presumes. And hammer is a good tool, and any tool that is used well benefits us, and it completes things, and it helps us accomplish things as a human being that we would be otherwise unable to do with our own two hands. Everyone knows, however, that a hammer can be used incorrectly. For example, if you were trying to pound the nail in this way, you wouldn't get very far. If you're not sure with your aim and you're not a very good hammer wielder, you can end up smashing your finger, and that doesn't help anything. And that's the next notion of what a tool or a means is. When it's not used how it's supposed to be used, things get worse. Things become disordered, and things end up hurting. I have another tool to illustrate that example. This tool is very useful as long as it's used properly. If, for example, next week when turkey season opens, a large tom is walking in front of my blind, it will be a very beneficial tool for me. If, however, I didn't follow all the rules and I didn't take my hunter safety course and all that sort of thing, it could be very unbeneficial for someone when it's not used as intended, that sort of tool. But then also, no one would ever just leave, a hammer even, where a 3-year-old can get it and start clocking people around. But certainly no one would ever leave a gun, I hope, laying around in a living room or something like that. Because, well, of course, much worse things can happen. We would be accused of negligence if we were leaving such things around. Well, that just means that the more important the tool is, the more powerful it is, let's say, the more drastic are its consequences, but also the greater way it can help us. If you look at, the various tools, the means of our lives, okay, we have weapons, we have roads and driving and cars, or especially things that help us make money-making schemes and businesses and stuff like that. The higher up the level you go and the more impact it has on people, the more rules there are. There's a lot of rules for being able to drive down the road and which side you're supposed to be on and speed limits and all that sort of thing. And if there weren't, there'd be a whole lot more problems with all these tools being used. It only makes sense. The more impacting these means are that we're using, the more serious we have to take them and the more rules there should be. All right, well, there's one particular tool that I want to talk to you about today, and especially it's because while we're all on lockdown, quarantine, it's the thing to go to. That tool are these thingies, our phones, our computers, laptops, tablets. We can call it technology, especially as regards the internet. And like I said, it's pretty apropos because since we have nothing else to do, no other human interaction, the internet is exploding with things to keep us occupied. There's countless original songs being produced. There's, extra movies. There's live stream plays. There's live stream this. There's all sorts of things to, keep us entertained while we're locked in our living rooms. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, obviously, because if it is a tool and it is a means, and that's what technology is, it can be used well. And of course, very well. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Nor would you be able to live stream the Holy Week ceremonies or things like that. More on that later. But the problem is with technology, and this is what I thought it would be a beneficial reminder to talk about during this time, is that there are no rules. There are no barriers. There's no trigger guards. There's no rules for the internet and for things that use the internet. And there should be, because this has a serious impact on our lives. And if we're just going to go into it willy-nilly, there's going to be serious consequences. And so as far as making rules, it's up to us. It's up to you, especially as parents, to put those rules in place because they're not there now. So that's what we're going to talk about. And when I say it's up to you, I refer back to the secret of parenting. This has to come from your love. If you love your children, you will do what it takes to provide safe use of technology in your house for the sake of your children's souls. Like I said, we can see the good results, but the danger is definitely there when these things aren't used well. Most tools don't lead you to hell if they're improperly used. Case in point, or the gun even. But these means very well can. Not only that, but they really can drive wedges in between different members of the same family. Wedges where love should be connecting. I'm just going to give a brief outline, just a sketch. We're going to talk about how we have to wake up to the dangers that are involved with using this particular tool, these means. We're going to go through it briefly and not drag things out. So we're going to start with the negative things. And we're probably going to talk most of the time about negative things because that's the whole point. We know the good things, I hope. First of all, and especially for Holy Week, I say this, technology, lots of videos, music, stuff like that, it's not helping our silence. It's not helping our peace of soul. I don't need to go into how watching the news doesn't help that and all that sort of thing. But especially for Holy Week, please, even if it's legitimate, spend a lot less time sucking in just entertainment things so that we can have some sort of spirit of recollection for these beautiful and serious days. But then, we have to talk about, some of the more particular effects. And of course, I'm going to be preaching a lot to the choir. Hopefully, most of you will react with, oh my goodness, Father, why would you presume that of us? There's no way we would. I hope that's the reaction. Please, God, let it be so. But at the same time, what I'm talking about are legitimate dangers that are there just by its use. And so we can't presume that we will be affected differently than the rest of the world. I've been doing whole lot of reading and research about this sort of thing. These are just my books on social media, which I have more, because it seems to be the big question of the day. So don't feel like anyone's being judged. We're going to talk about worst case scenarios so that we can all just be comfortable with knowing it's out there because we have to wake up to it. Okay, the first thing we want to just mention is the effect that a lot of screen time can have on our mental, our psychological health, and especially the formation of kids. I don't need to explain this in detail. All you need to do is look at a 4-year-old as he's watching a movie and see just how very engrossed he or she might be. There's plenty of books about it. I invite you to go do your own research, but just think of maybe 2 things. Just the idea of putting a child in a dark room and flashing a blue flashlight in his eyes on and off and off and on is probably going to have some sort of effect on his optic nerves and his cranial workings in general. But much more than that, what we're doing is we're taking advantage of a child's absorption capabilities, and we're completely overriding them. So a child is meant to be able to learn by absorbing things, and with over stimulus, it sort of burns that whole thing out, and he's left with sort of just this reeling, I don't know what else to do now because I'm not able to process things at a normal speed like I'm meant to. That's a normal consequence of a lot of screen interaction with a child. If your kids ever come and tell you they're bored or something like that, that shouldn't really be the case with children. They should never be bored. But what happens is their creative instincts and their absorption qualities are hijacked and overstimulated, and so they're left with there's no more fuel for me to go out and explore. It is a serious problem. It's not the biggest problem. But it is a difficult one. Think of it this way. If you're kindling a fire and you just put in paper and birch bark, that fire is going to go very hot and very bright for about 3 minutes. And then it's going to go, whoop. That's what it's like when a little child's brain is overstimulated. It's very bright, and then afterwards it's whoop. We want to give them something lasting, something that they can go out, use their hands with, or use their mind to be able to connect things themselves and not just have everything projected into the back of their head. There's another difficulty. It's very interesting. There's something that we call flow state. Anyone who's definitely an artist, but even someone like an athlete, or I've been told computer programmers can get into flow state, or reading, running. Different things that we switch into automatic mode, and all of a sudden everything just flows, and it's a very pleasant sort of feeling when your subconscious can just kind of like do its thing, and every paintbrush stroke is perfect, or every dribble is perfect, and the passes are just all that sort of thing. That's when we get into flow. Technology stimulates flow mode very quickly, but the problem is the things that we're letting in aren't actually the things that we're producing. So it's kind of counterintuitive, and it happens to children almost instantly. Here's all we need to say about that. It's a legitimate cause of mental stress, one that we shouldn't want to expose our children to too much, of course. And well, what's really true is that we probably wouldn't let our kids use it as much, because let's face it, we all kind of know it's strange to see a child so absorbed in a screen, and we hate it whenever we go to Walmart or something and we see kids just glued in. We would come down harder on it, I think, if it didn't mean that we'd have to be hypocritical. There's something I think in most of us, especially for families perhaps that have kids that are a lot more tuned into screens, that they know that if they had to come down, and maybe this is just a subconscious knowing, but if they had to come down hard on their kids' screen usage, they would have to do something themselves. And it would be a hypocrisy to just say, hey, get off your screen so much, if they're not doing it themselves. That's a difficult barrier. And the other side of the truth is that children simply crave their parents to provide what technology can't. And that's close and significant contact, interaction. And that's what they really need. Internet in general, algorithms, it's a real thing. It's not a conspiracy. The internet really is designed to take advantage and exploit your smallest little interests. Every search you make, every like that you make, every interest, every time you watch a funny cat video after you read the news, all of these different designed algorithms are taking all of that information, constantly trying to project the things that you might be interested in most. Money making, all that sort of thing. It's a real thing. It's not a conspiracy. Everybody find a book. We'll skip kind of that section, and we'll go into maybe the 2 biggest dangers of technology. And again, the only reason I'm bringing it up is because I do think that it's a relative danger, and one that especially older parents, but not, senior citizens, but somewhere, in the 30 to 40 range, don't realize as much. And it's time we really do have to wake up about it, especially now. So let's talk about social media. This conversation probably won't make me very many friends, but again, it is out of love of souls that I say it. What is social media? If you've ever heard of Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Yik Yak, TikTok, WhatsApp, Tumblr, Pinterest, all these different apps are social media apps. They're ways for people to hang out, to interact, to converse with each other online in a virtual setting, to share videos, to share pictures. There's video stories that are compilations of videos and extra comments and annotations and stuff like that. It's hypothetically, it's a sharing of friends on a virtual level. Here's the thing about social media. There are no limits. There are no rules. People don't get social media to have private lives. There are no road rails. There are no speed limits. We have to be aware of that from the beginning. So if we were to just bump down through the difficulties that it can provide, especially for the youth, our teenagers, we can talk about general addiction and whether that means psychological or actually physical dopamine rushes and all that sort of thing. We can leave that for the experts. There's plenty of studies. It has a real impact on sleep, on health in general, mental health, because of just how much time it takes during the day and during the night. It disrupts our ability to communicate in person. It undermines truth because now we have a floating atmosphere of opinions. It makes arguments meaningless. It makes politics impossible. And all of those points, obviously, we can go on at length, but we'll skip it for now because this is just a brief outline sketch to get us aware of things. It directly opens us up to the insanity of our times. And that's not just social media, that's technology in general. That's the movies we're watching, that's the music we're listening to. We know there's problems in the world, but to let it into our house is another problem. It's like opening up our mouths to receive the insanity of our times, because whatever we're watching, we're taking it in. And that's especially the case for children. You wouldn't leave your gun loaded in the living room. You wouldn't leave a wild tiger living in your living room. But there's something else that we've opened up the door to. Social media brings out the worst in people because there's no barriers. It's very easy to hide behind texts. Everyone gets meaner because they can hide behind digital words. There's a lot more controlling. There's a lot more self-inflating. All the weaknesses of pride because there's no response. There's no barriers. There's no reserve. And all the weaknesses we have as human beings are exposed. If you don't believe me, scroll through the comments on any video or perhaps check the hate mail in the inbox or whatever it is. Well, as far as the teenagers go, maybe one of the biggest problems, I think the biggest problem with social media is the pressure that it puts on them. As human beings, we need love, simply speaking. And the younger we are, the more we need that sort of affirmation. We need to know that it is good that I exist. And especially if it's not being received with normal and close and significant interaction at home, they're going to look for it elsewhere. But it doesn't even have to be necessarily a problem. It's a friend thing for starters, usually. Friends have a real place in our lives. But I invite you all to remember, as when you were, 15 years old or 14 or 13 in high school or pre-high, and chances are you were somewhat insecure. Chances are there were at least some people that you cared about what they thought about you, or that you were nervous about, how they would react and stuff like that. We were all insecure to some point, but on social media, everyone's the bully. The lowest common denominator is what reigns. No one's going to stand up because it's all about being social and open and cool. No one's going to be able to, stand up to the bully. It's hard enough as it is when it's one person, but now it's the social sphere. The lowest common denominator is what reigns. Everyone's the bully in a sense. And we have to realize that there is a fear there. And fear is a profound emotion. it hurts when we're afraid. And so it's controlling. And then while there's a pressure of constantly pushing barriers, there's constantly pushing boundaries. You might be shocked then, and especially, if it's, we're a good family, we would never, of course, we're not presuming that. But if there's no limits, if there's no barriers, there's no such thing as the society traditional Catholic version of Snapchat. It's open to the rest of the world. And if that's the case, it only takes a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend to somehow find his way back very easily onto your feed and contact you, and whatever else can happen. There's no boundaries, and social pressure grows very, very much. It's certain you will come into contact with others, a frequent user of social media. It's certain you will come into contact with people that have a much lower notion of morality, if any at all, as you do, or as the Catholic faith wants us to do. It's certain that frequent users will be exposed to graphic content on social media. It's absolutely certain. Because they can't control what's being sent or what's being put on a given feed or a story or something like that. And as what's going to happen, because the world has no sense of morality, no sense of sacredness, it's not just social pressure, it's sexual pressure. The world is hypersexualized, that's obvious, but that sort of pressure is extremely fed into and extremely emphasized on the social media level. And most people, at least adults, have no idea it's even going on. But how could we possibly presume that everyone on there will be moral? We can't. And so not only are there hard complexes being pushed by trying to fit in on the social level, there's disordered sexual, hypersexualized complexes being pushed. It's probable that at some point, by probable I mean more likely than not likely, that at some point, even a good person that's just trying to keep in contact with friends and stuff like that will at some point not only be exposed to graphic content, but be asked for it. It's probable, more than likely. And there's just, layers and layers of pressure after that. This is the world of pressure. It's name bashing in a truly disgusting way. And most teenagers will at least tell you, yeah, there's just so much drama, so much running people's names through the mud. And a funny and interesting thing, maybe not funny, maybe sad, in that ironic sort of funny way, is that they realize it. Even the youth of the world. These books they're not written by traditional Catholics. The youth realize it, and they actually hate it to a degree. They hate to be burned, and they hate burning their life. But universally, they say they won't stop, or they can't stop, or at least it's very difficult to stop, because even though it's wrecking their lives and it's hurting them, if they were to stop it, they wouldn't have a life. They would feel isolated. FOMO, fear of missing out. They would always be wondering what else is going on out there. And so now if we realize the real problem here with social media isn't them. It's not the kids. It's not the youth. It's not even social media necessarily. It's just that they're not offered a real alternative. It shouldn't be the case that a child in any family would say, I don't feel like I have a life if I can't be on media with my friends. It shouldn't be the case. No one should ever feel isolated in their own family, but especially not ours. And that's how it starts to drive a wedge between kids and their parents. They start to seek that sort of friendship, that familial friendship outside of their family. That increases the wedge. And then perhaps something does happen. Perhaps something embarrassing or even shameful happens. Maybe the child wasn't even supposed to be on in the first place. Maybe not. But there's no way, because the wedge is already started, that they're going to be able to go to mom and dad for that sort of thing. Now it's becoming an insuperable wedge because there's fear involved as well. If they have smartphones at all, it's very uncool, let's say, and hard to be expected of a teenager to not want to be part of this fear. That's just kind of reality. And I think it would be shocking to think of a father that wouldn't want to say to his son, or especially his daughter, I would rather die than let you be put in that sort of position where something can hurt you. I would rather die than that. I'd be shocked if some father wouldn't say that. And well, of course, there's questions of privacy versus openness versus rights versus trust versus lurking and hovering. We don't have to go into that. The principle is love. It's much, much more than that. I want what's best for you. And I don't have to hover to be able to form a bond of trust. Okay, well, furthermore, just to finish off our whole negative list of things, we have to be very aware of something, and that is that impure content is the reality today. Pornography is a reality of the internet. I suppose probably every generation has to come to grips with some sort of disordered reality in their life, and we'd rather not talk about it or think about it, but it's simply the case. It's one of the largest use of internet bandwidths ever in the entire world, and it's an enormously far-reaching billion-dollar enterprise. And there's no mistakes here. There's no accidents. There's no rules. There's no boundaries. If there's access to the internet, there's not only access to impure content, there's invitation. Pornography exploits the greatest natural and physical good that God created us to have on the, again, natural physical level. Sacred human love. And something that God did create so good and so sacred, it exploits it. And the corruption of the best is the worst. It's too much for us to be able to handle. It's too much, especially for a child to be able to handle. It is certain failure, because with it comes not only an enormous chemical process, there's already breaking down of habits before good habits can even be formed. And those effects go all the way into the rest of our life. And if it doesn't become cured or healed, it turns into a loss of an ability to love. It turns into a loss of an ability to sacrifice. And if there's no love, there's no reason to exist. There's no reason to try. There's only going to be a constant trying to fill that gap. And it's everywhere. And of course it starts soft. But again, it would be shocking to me for a parent to say, I would rather die than let you have even one chance of that happening to you. Having said that, it doesn't mean that I would rather die than let you walk out of the house or ever use technology at all. Of course not. My point is, we'll get into some practical things that can help right now. But the point is that we have to make this a priority to teach our children positive virtues, the sacredness of human sexuality and our human nature, and the dangers out there before they have to fight the battles. Okay, perhaps those are extreme. Perhaps we were shocked at some of the ideas, but I think we have to be honest enough to know these are the realities of our day. They are not necessarily the realities of our families, please God. But at the same time, we cannot pretend to be affected differently than any other human being. And so we have to be aware of it. We have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to be honest with ourselves. This is where it's going to start. Try not to look at your own phone for a full day and see how difficult it is. Going back to just the ideas of, how much time technology takes from us and how much distraction and how much lack of peace of soul, if we were just to start with that. All of these things, especially the really scary things, they really should scare us. I hope they do. The risk of our children being introduced to something they can't handle is to allow the possibility of them being abused. That should scare us. To allow our children to be in a world of artificiality that preys off of pressure when the lowest common denominator is always present, is to allow the possibility of them to live a life of fear, anxiety that can lead to, self-absorption, which can lead to self-hatred at the same time, and to allow the possibility of a wedge being driven between me and my children. That idea should scare us. Well, what do we do? Okay. Because we had to talk about the extremes to get it all out there. But what do? Don't start with your kids. Don't start with an interdict. Don't start with an inquisition against technology with your family. It has to start with us. It has to start with the adults. It has to start with parents. You have to order and regulate your own lives. Think of it this way. If you're going to pass on principles to your children, if they're not your own, you will not be able to pass them on. For example, children absorb the English language just by listening to it. They know a whole language before we've even shown them one flashcard because we know the language and they absorb it from us. If you don't know Spanish and you say, I'm going to teach my little Johnny Spanish by the time he's 4, you can fake it very well and you can make things up and you can sing songs in Spanish. But if you don't really know Spanish, he's not going to know it either. It's the same thing with our principles of morality and technology use and use of our means and rights and ends. We have to think about these and get the ideas right in our heads. What do you want for your family? Not from your family. What do you want for your family? And there's no right of anyone that supersedes that. No right of privacy that can supersede the common good of your family. We don't have that idea of common good instinctively anymore. Why not? Because, just the very idea that we have to get up and draw water and feed the cows and stuff like that. Otherwise, we'll all starve at the end of the day. We simply don't have that anymore. We all have our own rooms and we all can order our own Amazon things. And we don't have to work for the common good of the family anymore. So we're losing the idea. That's why we're constantly fighting. So if we were to try and go back to the idea of how can I work for the common good of my family, we'll start with love. Start with wanting to help them. Start with openness. We have to be humble enough to admit this in ourselves. This tendency for technology to control us instead of us controlling it. It's not to control, it's not to hover, it's to form trust by being open, by showing them positive ways, by starting with our own example, but not just example, but our own life, so that can be received naturally. We want to give them tools for growing up in a hyper world by giving them positive virtue, meaning wanting to choose good things, not just running from bad things. If, let's say, technology use in each family was just much more open, everyone on the same page, that would already be a huge thing. So just some basic like family rules that could be talked about. We shouldn't ever use phones in bedrooms. There's no right to that. It should be rare that someone needs to contact someone or a parent needs to look up something or something like that in a way that no one else can know. That should be very rare, but it shouldn't be the case for children. They don't need it. Nothing should ever be unprotected. It's insane. As far as internet filters or accountability software, that shouldn't be possible. That something be in our families that doesn't have that. Accountability software is great, especially the earlier you start, because now it's not I'm taking away your privacy, is we're just doing this together. Look, I want to help you be able to use something, this technology, and learn how to use it well and learn how to deal with temptations when they come, because they will. And if you use something like there's an app called Ever Accountable, and it simply just makes everything more or less public to the family, or at least the parents. If something comes up, a bad message comes in or a bad site accidentally, and great, well, now it's open and we've been open from the very beginning. I'm not being Mr. Cop over your shoulder. It's all on the table. We have to get rid of this idea that our phones are our own sacred little private lives. It's not true. It's not a right that God gave us, because it's not helping. Some things just have to be forbidden as well. It's impossible that there be unrestricted use of social media. It's impossible that there be certain types of entertainment. Whenever purity is a question as far as a movie goes, it's never worth it. It's impossible that there be unrestricted access to the internet or applications. In fact, many priests would consider that even for a parent to let their child have unrestricted access to be, qualifications for a grave sin, perhaps. Take your entertainment times together, but make them times. The phone shouldn't be something, or the computer, whatever, shouldn't be something that controls us or runs the day. Make time limits, make time slots. It's movie night. That's something that could be possible. But to even just the idea of scrolling through shopping and Pinterest things and all this thing, it shouldn't be whenever I want. That starts to control us, and we have to admit it. What would be better? Well, maybe we have a family board. Maybe we just have a time when this is when we do our online shopping, stuff like that, to control it, to give it your own rules, your own speed limits, your own road barriers, and all that sort of thing, and to dump the dumb ideas of privacy. And lastly, well, this is probably the most important, we have to give alternatives. And it has to start, again, with you. It can't be, well, Father's right, off with your phone, now go out and do things. It doesn't work like that. It starts with, what are you willing to give? What are you willing to give to these souls that God has entrusted to you? Doesn't mean we have to find constant activities. That's way too much work, of course. But it does mean we have to find ways to put structure in our families' lives. And that's so important, especially during these quarantine times. Make a schedule, have a wake up time, have a time for prayer, have a time for homework, have a time for the kids to go outside, have a time to work together for the common good of the family, chores or whatever it is. Have a time for arts and crafts, have a time for naps, but have a time for it. Give some sort of structure so that we're not just, well, what do I check what's on YouTube? It's way too easy, and it sucks us in. So alternatives. But the most important principle is it has to start with us. It has to start with our own lives, regulate them firstly, and then out of love for the souls entrusted to us, turn towards them. And so hopefully this idea, even if there's some serious things in it, doesn't mean I have to run away from everything. No, these tools can be used well. They can be used responsibly, obviously. But no one else is going to make them responsible except for you, for your family. Well, that was sort of a lot during Holy Week. And so, as I promised, very quickly, and it's going to be practical as well, just a little note as far as Holy Week goes. I hope that you will be watching the ceremonies that will be live streamed. I suggest the ones being live streamed from St. Mary's because our choir in our school is going to be beautiful. But a lot of people are wondering, what's normal? How do I watch a mass or a ceremony that's being live streamed in my living room? Do we wear chapel veils? Do we kneel? Do we make the sign of the cross? These are very good questions. And try as I might, I could not find anything in St. Thomas. I could not find anything in St. Alphonsus. In fact, I couldn't find anything anywhere because I don't think this has really been a question that's been brought up too often. But here's the principles that we do know. First of all, the liturgy is a public prayer. It's a prayer of the church, which means at every single mass, at every single divine office that's being offered liturgically, the entire mystical body is present before God, worshiping him. And that includes all of us, willy-nilly, even if we realize it or not. But the more we realize it and attach our intention to it, the more we will be actually worshiping God, bringing him glory, but receiving the graces as well. That's the liturgy. It is a public prayer by definition. It's the prayer of Christ and the mystical body of Christ with him to the Father. The Novus Ordo has lost that idea. That's why they don't have private masses usually. It's because if it's something more of a dinner than a sacrifice to God that includes the entire mystical body, what's the point? But if you look at the language of the traditional mass, it's benedicat vos. Miserator vobis. It's you all. And we say that even if there's only one server, or if for some reason there's no servers, I'm still going to turn around and say benedicat vos. May God, the Holy Trinity, bless all of you. That means the liturgy is a public prayer. And well, okay, now when you're in your living room, we're going to consider that, mostly a private prayer, like when you pray your rosary. But at the same time, if you're there being offered and offering as part of the mystical body, there's no reason to say that you can't join to that particular mass or ceremony in a more real way, and even in perhaps a liturgical way. I say perhaps because I'm not a pope, and so I would think this follows sound theology, but I stand to be corrected by any Dominicans out there or otherwise. I don't think there's a reason why it couldn't be a closer participation, something more than just a private prayer, when we're making something that's happening present to us in some way through the medium of a screen even, and we're uniting our intention to it. And if that's the case, well, then it makes a lot of sense to actually help our dispositions by following along like we normally would. I think there's maybe perhaps extremes on both sides that we need to avoid. Don't genuflect as you cross the living room. But at the same time, don't be, if you're going to watch it as a prayer, if you're going to watch it with the family as, wanting to join in the ceremonies of Holy Week, don't treat it as a joke. Don't be watching it in your pajamas. Don't be, eating something while it's going on, even if you're not going to be receiving Holy Communion. It doesn't make sense. If it's going to be a prayer, make it a prayer, I would say. Don't confuse it, especially for the sake of smaller children. Of course, there's no obligation when we talk about it. But at the same time, there's no reason you can't make it more of a prayer by joining in and following the normal actions like you would do at Mass. If it's strange to kneel before TV, I hope it will be. I hope that is a strange feeling, because if it's not, that would be very strange. Maybe it would help to, put a crucifix somewhere very prominent right above it or in front of it or something like that. Light a candle beneath Our Lady's statue. It would make sense to make an atmosphere of prayer and joining your intention in these beautiful ceremonies. And of course, there's going to be more graces received from that than otherwise. And so that's something I definitely suggest and hope that you benefit from. And be assured of all of our prayers here. Thank you for spending time with me. I went kind of long, but I warned you to bring your coffee ahead of time, so hopefully you did. God bless you all, and wishing you a blessed Holy Week.